So, Dr. Chaffee, welcome to the BLEMARX podcast, and we're gonna get straight into it. What made you question the nutritional and diet science? What got you into the carnivore diet in the beginning?
Well, I had a professor that just said something very crazy to us that seemed very crazy at the time. He was a professor of cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle, which is, it's a very good institution, very good biological sciences, top medical school in the world, or in America, I should say. And people think it's Harvard. It's not. It's actually University of Washington's number one for training doctors. Harvard's number one for research. UW was number seven for research when I was looking at it, and then Johns Hopkins is tied with UW. Sort of they're sort of one and two each year, right? So it's a very, very good institution. So I took what he said seriously, but it was pretty wild because he was telling us about how vegetables have natural toxins that cause harm and damage and can even cause cancer. Now, I'd already taken botany and biology. I already understood that plants defend themselves with using chemical toxins and deterrents, but I hadn't put that into context with just the vegetables that we eat. I was thinking those are just the plants in the woods that you don't eat, as opposed to the plants that you do eat. But he was saying the plants that we eat still have toxins. They're not as bad for us as other things. They don't just kill us on the spot, but they can cause harm over time that can lead to cancer and other sorts of illnesses. And that was very mind blowing for me, but it was persuasive enough that I just I just refused to eat plants after that. And so I was like, okay, what else do I eat? I mean, everything has plants in it, and I just sort of defaulted into eggs and meat just because there was nothing else to eat. And I didn't think about it in the carnivore context, where that our ancestors have been apex predators for 2 million years, and so that was actually what we are biologically designed to eat until many many years later. But I took traditional nutrition classes and biology classes, biochemistry classes, went to medical school, got all the traditional sort of teaching, but then I started seeing how we didn't have answers for chronic disease. We didn't have answers for why we get diabetes, why we get cancer, why we get heart disease, why we get heart failure, why we get autoimmunity. It was all these unanswered questions, and historically, doctors have been looking for the reasons why the disease was there and how to cure it, what was causing it, what could cure it. And I started noticing that we stopped looking for the cures. We started just looking to treat the symptoms, and we didn't want to cure them because that's not where the money was. And that was the incentive was somewhere else. It was to treat and not to cure, because that, it sort of sounded flippant at the time, but I think it's very true now. People saying that a patient cured is a customer lost, and it's a pretty nasty way to think about it. But honestly, that is actually how some of these drug companies think, or these investment companies think. Goldman Sachs flat out said, it's not a good business model to cure someone of disease. You should not try to cure someone of disease. You need to treat the symptoms for a long period of time, and then you make a lot more money, which is really nasty, And so I started just seeing these things. It's just sort of these cracks started popping in. And then I came across information that just really hit home to me, that humans actually are carnivores. It's just biologically the type of animal we are. And I looked back on those 5 years in my early 20s where I stopped eating all plants because of the things that my professor had said. And everything just made sense. It's like, okay, that's the time of my life that I've never felt better, and I've never been able to figure out how to get back there. But that's what I was doing. I wasn't eating any plants. I was only eating meat. So I said, okay, I'm going to try that again. And within 2 weeks, I literally felt like I was 22 again. I was 38 at the time, and I just got back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. I was completely out of shape and hadn't played rugby in a while. I used to play professional rugby before I went to medical school, and then continued playing rugby throughout medical school and beyond. But I hadn't played in a couple of years, and all of a sudden I just felt like a superhero. I felt like I was 22 again, and I started looking at that and was like, okay, I feel like I did when I was 22. I feel better now at 38 than I did at 28 playing professional rugby, but eating an omnivorous diet. I never ate junk food ever. So this wasn't like, well, I was eating junk food and then I ate this and that's the improvement. That's the trope that people push out there, but it's nonsense. I never ate junk food. not regularly anyway. I think I had KFC once a decade, you know, and and I have a lot of patients that have never eaten large amounts of junk food, and they get very sick. And it's not until we get rid of the plants that they get better. So I started questioning things. Then I started looking at things at how much better I felt. I started researching. Okay, well, what do we know? What can we prove? And what information is out there? And I started looking into the literature and asking questions and looking for studies. And I found that there's this entire world of information, studies, and randomized controlled evidence that had never been introduced to me in medical school or beyond. And so it's like this whole ocean of information opened up to me, and I just started looking for it, and I just started looking through it, asking questions and looking in the literature. And I think most doctors don't understand at how little we are actually taught in medical school and residency. We are taught a very, very curated piece of information that basically serves to sell products and finance HMOs and drug companies and things like that. We are not actually taught all the best information out there. We assume that this is curated, perfect information, that this is the best of the best, and if we weren't taught it, it means it's not good enough to be taught. That's not the case. It's just that they don't sell a product. You know, these other things don't sell a product. And so I sort of saw that and realized that there's so much more information out there. And then I started looking at this from that chronic disease perspective, that we are getting more and more chronic diseases. We're fatter and sicker than we've ever been in human history. And we are also biologically carnivores that are not eating as carnivores, are not living as carnivores. 70 to 80% of the Western diet, America, Europe, Australia, etc., and other places are worse than this. But the Western diet is 70 to 80% plant-based. The definition of a hyper-carnivore, like a polar bear or a shark, is any animal that eats over 70% calories from meat. So the Western diet is a hyper-vegetarian diet. So we are carnivores eating a hyper-vegetarian diet. We're hyper-carnivores eating a hyper-vegetarian diet. So we're not going to get all the nutrients we need, and we're going to get a lot of these plant toxins that we can't deal with as well because we're not biologically adapted to. And when I looked at it like that, everything in medicine just started slotting into place. All these things, all the reasons why we didn't know what caused diabetes, we didn't know what caused heart, but we thought it was cholesterol. That's complete utter garbage. We didn't know what caused autoimmunity. We didn't know what caused heart failure. We didn't know what caused cancer. We didn't know all these different things, and it just started slotting into place. 90% of what people in the Western world die from is from a chronic disease, a so-called non-communicable chronic disease, something that happened from your environment to your body, something that was not genetic, it was not infectious, you can't catch it from anybody, it's just something in your environment damaged your health and you died from it after decades of wear. And so obviously if it's something that's in your environment, if you take it out of your environment, you should be able to prevent it, not only prevent it, but also be able to reverse it, right? If you have lead poisoning, if you don't want to get lead poisoning, don't expose yourself to lead. But if you have lead poisoning, taking away the lead will help you recover from lead poisoning. And it's the same with everything else. So I think these chronic diseases are actually like lead poisoning. They're chronic exposure to low-grade toxins or even high-grade toxins and a lack of species-specific nutrition where our bodies don't work properly and we start getting problems. Heart disease, for example, you get B12 deficiency. You won't be able to metabolize and break down homocysteine properly. Homocysteine is known to cause damage to the arteries and cause atherosclerosis. It's a known cause and risk factor for heart disease. That's caused by malnutrition. You're in a hyper-vegetarian diet that does not include B12 because B12 predominantly comes from meat. It doesn't exist in plants. And so if you're predominantly eating plants, you're going to be missing out on the B12. You're going to have high homocysteine. You're going to start getting heart disease. These things. So that all started making sense to me, and I started looking into this and researching this more and more, and I've come to the conclusion that these so-called chronic diseases are not diseases per se, but they're a buildup of toxicities and malnutrition. So a toxic buildup of a species-inappropriate diet and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely too many plants that we're not able to contend with the different toxins and anti-nutrients, and then not enough of the nutrients. And that's another way that plants defend themselves, by making things less available, bioavailable. They block out vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fats from being absorbed. So they compound that malnutrition side of things. And so, and there could be other toxic exposures as well. You could have pollution, you could have, water, contaminated water, even screen time, and kids being on phones and iPads and things like that. That's been shown in a number of studies to actually rot their brain. They have cortical thinning, so they thin the cortex of the brain, which is where you do your thinking, and it also thins the corpus callosum, where the two sides of the brain communicate with each other. So you're actually causing brain damage by being on these screens all the time. So that's another exposure that we're not biologically supposed to contend with, and that's causing harm. Kids' brains should only be growing. So to see them shrink, it means that there's something seriously wrong going on. So there's these sorts of things. So something going on in our environment that's not supposed to be there, and the lack of nutrition. And that's what I've sort of come to the conclusion of. That's what I'm writing my book about. And that's sort of how I've based my practice. I was in neurosurgery for a while, but now I've sort of branched off into a sort of preventative medicine, but also using those tenets that if you're sick, there should be something in your environment that we can resolve and improve your nutrition and hopefully fix. And that's what I'm seeing. We're seeing diseases go away. I've been able to treat diseases that I was taught were untreatable, and I'm able to reverse them and put them into remission better with nutrition and lifestyle interventions than anything I learned in medical school or neurosurgery. And there's nothing. I mean, you have a tumor in your brain, that thing needs to come out. If that thing's going to kill you, that's it. You got a compression on your spinal cord. You got to decompress that, or that person's going to be paralyzed. That is amazing. That you can cure things. But when you get into the chronic disease realm, we're really bad at it. And so this is definitely, apart from surgical fixes, this works better than anything else.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, that's a lot of things that I think a lot of people, they've never been taught. And when you get into the rabbit hole, I'm sure you were like mind blown. And
Yeah.
my question is because I come from like a Middle Eastern culture, it's full of carbs, and like most of the world is just full of carbs.
All of them,
Like,
yeah.
why do you think people started eating carbs? Is it was just survival because it was easier to access, and they didn't have the resources to acquire meat and things of those nature, or it was something else?
Well, I think at first it was survival, because when you had the megafauna that died out towards the end of the last ice age, people just didn't have access to meat that they had before. There are places that still had access to meat, and they kept those cultural ways. I mean, the Mongols now keep doing that. Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, they were carnivores. They hunted off the land. They ate their horses or drank their blood, and these sorts of things. And they took over and controlled the largest contiguous empire that has ever existed, and they held that for hundreds of years until the Black Death, the plague that wiped out 3/4 of humanity, and then that sort of caused problems that ended up having that collapse. So they were very successful as carnivores, massive civilization. And the Native Americans in the Great Plains, they had access to large bison, and so they could just live off the bison for the entire year. They'd scare a herd of buffalo over, be able to dry the meat, mix it with fat, and make pemmican. They'd eat that for the rest of the year. So the idea that this brought about civilization doesn't make sense, because the natives didn't have to follow. They weren't necessarily nomadic. They could just sit there and wait for the buffalo to come through, take off a bunch of them, dry the meat. They lived on that for the rest of the year. So they had plenty of leisure time. Had one or two big hunts a year, and that was it. The rest of the time was their own. And so, that's why there's, a lot of wars and all those different sorts of fights and conflicts. They had time on their hands. They could do that. But when you run out of those resources, you have to do something to survive. And so in certain areas, that was likely the case. And it could have also been convenience. There's people started, but farming's hard. I mean, it is hard work, especially back then. It's back-breaking labor. They didn't have all these big combine harvesters and things like that. Everything was done by hand. So, it was difficult work, and it's like work that you're doing just all the time. So, I don't know if it made things necessarily easier or more convenient, but it did allow people to survive. And once you did that, I mean, there are people that think that now this became sort of an addiction. People got more carb addicted, and started making these carbs and these sugars and these beer and alcohol from that, and they sort of became addicted to that sort of hedonistic approach to food and agriculture. But I think the major driver of it originally was survival nutrition. I mean, you see it at the same time. Dairy starting to be cultivated and livestock becoming domesticated. And they went for the largest animals with the most fat, and they get the dairy, and then they skim off the cream and make butter and all that sort of stuff, because it was important for us to get the fat. It was important for us to get those nutrients. And so we did that, and we see lactase persistence, where people are able to keep making lactase and drink milk and things like that into adulthood, which is not normal. That came around about 10, 12,000 years ago, exactly at that time. Then we look at, and we know the agricultural revolution came around 8, 10,000 years ago as well. So it's that same sort of time period. We're looking for alternative means of nutrition. And we know that we weren't eating tons of carbs or plants before that, because the enzyme amylase that we make to break down starches from plants, that doesn't even show up in the genome on a population-wide scale until about 10,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. Then it spread very rapidly because it was a survival advantage. That was what those people had to do. And so before that, you only see it show up a couple times, but the more repeats of that gene that you have, the more able you are to break down starches. So typically, you see a lot of these in populations that eat a lot of plant-based starches and things like that, and you just don't see that before 10,000 years ago. You're seeing it a bit here and there, but it's not until 10,000 years ago now you're getting these multiple repeats, and throughout the population it spread really well. So we know that. So I think that it really was started out as survival, and then that became a way of life, and that just became, this is just what you do. And so we got very used to that. I also think that since then, you see this throughout history, that meat became something for the elites. That was what the elites had, and they kept, the grains were cheaper, more accessible to the poor, and sometimes they were restricted to that. India, when England colonized India, people were brought out of their traditional, out in the country, hunting and fishing and doing all these sorts of things. They brought them in, put them on plantations, and then paid them in grains. So now they've completely changed their diet for a lot of these people, and some of them were Hindu and ate less meat anyway. But that wasn't all of them. And in Ireland, or even in England, and with like the serfs, the peasant class, they were mostly restricted to eating grains and maybe rabbits that they could catch. That was sort of what kept them, alive, is basically being able to catch rabbits, because they were sort of quite plentiful. But you couldn't go in the woods. You couldn't go hunting. Those were the king's wood, the king deer, the king's pheasants. You could get, executed for poaching, for hunting, for just feeding your family meat. So that was a way of segregating the lower and upper classes. Whether they knew this or not, it stunts your growth to eat a lot of carbohydrates and not get enough meat. So you're going to be shorter, you're going to be weaker. Carbohydrates raise insulin block growth hormone. Growth hormone makes you grow. And so if you're eating a lot of carbs, you will stunt your growth. Since agriculture, we've shrunk 5-6 inches. Our brains have shrunk, 10, 11% for men, 17% for women. So, our development has suffered as a result of this. You look at the Maasai and the Akikuyu, who are two African tribes. There was a study done in the 1920s when they were still just living very natural, sort of traditional ways of living. The Akikuyu were very much plant-based. The Maasai are very much meat-based, drinking milk, blood, and eating meat. But they live in the same area at the same time, the same conditions, and they interbred. So they're genetically similar. They're in the same conditions. It's a very, very, it's not a controlled study, but it's as controlled as you can get for these sorts of things. And they had very different diets: whole food, plant-based, whole food, meat-based. And the disparities were wild. They were almost exactly what you'd see in that pre and post agricultural look, where the Maasai were 5-6 inches taller on average for the adult male height. They had better health, better dentition. They didn't get chronic diseases. There was no diabetes. There was in the Akikuyu. And they were 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass, and they were 50% stronger. And the women were equally as different in the Maasai and Kikuyu tribes as well. And they got none of the chronic diseases. The Maasai got none of the chronic diseases that Kikuyu got, and the Kikuyu had all sorts of vitamin deficiencies. And even when the English replaced all those vitamins and gave them a bunch of supplements, they actually didn't improve their health. Their health didn't get better. It wasn't until they took away the plants and started feeding them meat that their health actually improved. So we see these disparities. So it wasn't an advantage to just eat more plant-based. Maybe for survival under certain circumstances, but not overall. And you look back at, the English did this a lot. Most governments did this a lot. They would sort of cut off the meat supply. What are people saying now? You need to stop eating all this meat. Only have 2 ounces of meat per week. And all this sort of like, okay, is that what you're restricting yourself to? I doubt it. And but they're telling us that we need to do that. Right, it's the same thing. You go back to Rome, and there's the old saying, "Bread and circuses." When people getting upset and about to riot and revolt, they would start giving out free bread, and they would put on circuses and gladiatorial shows and just distract people. So it's like, Uber Eats and Netflix. They just give you junk food and then distract you with something shiny, and everybody just settles down and go, whatever, I don't care anymore. So they were doing that. So the same thing. It's just bread and circuses, and but they don't talk about the flip side of that coin, which is, yes, they give out bread and they distract you with circuses, but the other thing that the Roman did is they cut off the meat supply to Rome. So they cut off the meat supply, but it's okay because they just give you free bread anyway, and that seemed to settle people down. So whether it makes people more docile or they thought it did, that's what they did. And I think it does. I think you get, Bill Burr, the comedian, said this very, very well. He says he thinks McDonald's is just, crushing everybody's spirits because, you get up on the morning, you're just like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Today's going to be the day. I'm going to change my life around. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that and do that. And then you get like a Big Mac and you on the couch, you're like, oh yeah, screw my dreams. I'm just going to sit here. And, there's some truth to that. And keep people sort of docile and easier to control. When you're sick and you're unwell, it's a lot easier to manipulate people, because if you're just miserable, you have no energy, and you just go day to day, and you're just trying to survive. Now you can't think about how people are manipulating you and screwing you over. You're working day to day, and it's a lot harder to sort of see like, hold on a second, these guys are messing around. And whereas you get healthy, you start seeing, okay, they lied to me about food. What else are they lying to me about? What else is going on? You really start thinking critically and examining what's going on around you. And I think there are people in this world that really don't want that for most people.
My wake-up call was during the 2020, the C19 days. That was my wake-up call. And then that kind of shifted my paradigm towards everything. And like my body, like this past couple of years, I've been eating mostly low carb. And every time I ate low carb, I was better. And then whenever I was increasing the carbs, as you said, my brain wasn't operating the right way. And I was like, there might be some truth in this carnivore diet. So I tried it maybe like a year and a half ago, and then I stopped after a couple of weeks. But then I came back to it this past month, and I've been strictly carnivore. As you said, I was watching your videos. You said the meat, eggs. You didn't necessarily fully recommend dairy. You didn't say like it just depends if your body can handle it. So for now, I'm just having eggs, meat. I have a little bit of butter or raw cheese, and that's about it. And I'm feeling great.
Yeah, good.
And I've been training for like a long time, so I was like curious. I'm like, when your body goes to ketosis, your body starts to use fat as fuel, and I've been having a lot of difficulty to get rid of the fat, and I've been on the caloric deficit, all these things, and 1,500 calories, 1,400 calories. I'm like, there is no way. It's just crazy. My brain doesn't work. I feel tired, and I'm still not getting lean. So I've been using the carnivore diet, and I feel like it's been doing well recently. So what's the science behind that?
Well, I mean, ketogenic metabolism is really just a fat burning metabolism. I think we really misname it. We judge it based on the fact that you have ketones in your blood. And all that means is that you're burning fat, you're oxidizing fat. That's all it is. And so you're in a fat burning metabolism. Okay, so the converse of that is that if you're not in a fat burning metabolism, you're in a non-fat burning metabolism. So it's hard to burn fat when you're not in a fat burning metabolism. And then metabolism is an important thing that comes into play as well, because people don't realize, it's not, we're not just like a combustion engine. We throw in wood and it burns and you get X amount of energy out and you get this much energy and that pushes a locomotive. That's not how we work. Your metabolism has a lot of control over what gets used, when, and how, and whether or not you're going to store energy versus using energy. And so we know from starvation trials, Minnesota starvation trials done during World War II, that yeah, you can starve people and they'll lose weight for a while, but then it just plateaus and they don't lose any weight. And then during this study, if it was just calories in, calories out, they would have lost more weight than they started with and were just poofed out of existence. We have people in concentration camps going, throughout the 20th century and beyond, where they've fed almost nothing. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was in the USSR gulags for 9 years and wrote about his time there, was a very, very powerful book. He talks about how their main meal was like 100 grams of black bread. Like that was their main meal. They had little bits of other things, but that was just one of the main things. He was in there for a decade. That people don't think that you can live on it. Oh yeah, you'll lose a ton of weight. Yeah, you'll lose weight and then it'll stop because your metabolism slows down. Every winter, the metabolism of animals slow down because they have to, because they'll die otherwise. You need to survive. So all life can slow down their metabolism and survive a famine, because we've all faced famine. All species have faced famines at one point or another, and the ones that couldn't weather the storm of a famine or winters, they're all dead. They're all extinct now. So any life that exists right now has the capability of surviving winter, of surviving famine, of surviving lean times, and that is, they shut down the metabolism. It slows it down. A bear drops its heart rate down to 3 beats per minute when it's hibernating, right? And it just sits there living off the fat over the course of that long winter, right? If it was just barreling through all this energy and keeping this super high metabolism, they'd be dead. They wouldn't make it through, right? So we need to recognize that your metabolism plays a huge role, and the different things that you eat affect your metabolism in different ways. You eat carbohydrates, it raises insulin. Insulin slows down your metabolism. The higher your insulin, the slower your metabolism. Insulin also blocks leptin, which is a satiety hormone, which controls your metabolism. And so your body thinks that you're starving, you're emaciated, and you need to slow down your metabolism. You need to eat more. So it tells your body to eat more and to store that energy, so you can survive, right? So that just changes. Insulin is the fat storage hormone. It will take you out of a fat-burning metabolism. We're supposed to be in a fat-burning metabolism. Basically, all animal life on Earth is in a fat-burning metabolism. Fat makes the animal kingdom go around. 70% of animal species, including insects, are carnivores, so they're just eating protein and fat. They're not eating carbohydrates, so they're in a fat-burning metabolism because they're not in a carb-burning metabolism. And then herbivores that eat fibrous plants, they break that fiber down, not into glucose. It's actually the bacteria that eat the glucose, and that they produce as a byproduct saturated fat and protein. And so that's what they absorb. And so there again, gorillas get 70% of their calories from saturated fat and basically the rest of it from protein. So they're in a ketogenic state. Cows are in a ketogenic state. Elephants are in a ketogenic state. Whales are in a ketogenic state. It's just a fat-burning state. You eat, you store some of that energy as fat, and then you use that fat to go about your life. It's like filling up your gas tank at the gas station. You fill up your tank and then you drive on that tank for the week. You don't have to like constantly pour gasoline into your engine. You just fill up the tank and run on the tank. So when you eat carbohydrates, it shuts that down. You now go out of a fat burning metabolism. Now you're not in a fat burning metabolism. If your insulin is high enough, it's not possible to lose fat. People get an insulinoma, which is a tumor that secretes insulin. They cannot lose fat. It doesn't matter what they eat. They will continue to gain weight and get enormously obese. They're very tired. They feel horrible, but they just can't lose weight until that tumor is removed. And then you have the opposite side of that, which is type 1 diabetics who stop making insulin, and they can't put on fat. They can't put on weight. So they could eat 50,000 calories a day. They just waste away until they die. Unless, of course, they go on a ketogenic diet like Carnivore, which was the treatment for type 1 diabetes for hundreds of years. And that was the only treatment. That was according to the professor at Johns Hopkins University, Sir William Osler, 1910. I have his textbook on medicine, and his chapter on diabetes says explicitly, we follow the advice of Sydenham, who was a doctor from the 1600s, and this is how he treated this, and a lot of other things. Have them eat highly digestible, easy to digest foods such as veal and mutton, so meat. Avoid all fruits and vegetables. Keep carbs down to zero. What is that if not a carnivore diet, right? So that was the treatment from Johns Hopkins University, the gold standard for the world, for decades and centuries for treating diabetes. So, this is just how that metabolism works. So when you type 1 diabetics now, if they don't get insulin, they'll be dead within 2 weeks, right? And that's because the body just can't function without insulin. It's very important. And so they could eat 50,000 calories a day. They'll just keep wasting away. And then there's an eating disorder called diabulimia, where type 1 diabetics they just want to get shredded up for the weekend or something like that, and go to a pool party. And so they just stop taking insulin for a few days, and they'll lose like 10, 20 pounds real easy. They'll just get super lean. And so that's how those hormones work. You're talking about calorie restriction, getting down to 1,400 calories a day, 1,500 calories a day. We know in weight loss medicine, especially in bariatric surgery, where you're getting, you're eviscerating people and chopping up their organs to try to make them lose weight, so they physically can't eat as much or absorb their food, which I think is honestly malpractice. I think it is just absolutely unacceptable to do that to people. For a number of different reasons. I mean, not least of all the problems that it causes. But 5 years later, they statistically regain all the weight and more anyway. So You're giving them a 5-year reprieve because they're malnourished, and then they're worse off than when they started. So that's just absurd. I think that practice is absurd. But the thing is that when you have people go through those things, they'll still get the advice, say, okay, look, we've chopped up your stomach, you can't eat as much, but you have to eat enough. So what they'll tell is the men is that if you don't eat at least 1,400 calories a day, you won't lose weight. And women, if you don't eat at least 1,200 calories, you won't lose weight. So why is it that we're saying that if you just eat less, move more, you'll lose weight, when we know in medicine, that you eat less than 1,200 calories, your body's going to shut down your metabolism. You're not going to lose weight, and for men, 1,400. So you can actually, eating slightly less, you can probably get away with that. But you keep doing it for too long, or you do it too much and too fast, you will shut down your metabolism, and you'll actually slow down that fat loss. Yeah. And then you'll actually, when you start eating again, you'll regain more than you lost. And this is what people see. They sort of starve themselves down, they lose a bit of weight, but then it plateaus, they feel awful, they have no energy, like you described, and then they start eating just what they were before, they'll actually regain more weight than they lost. And then they starve themselves again, they lose a little bit, but then not as much, and then they plateau, and then they regain. So they're going up and down, but they're going up and down in an upward trajectory. And that's most people's experience.
That's perfectly explained. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you just go into a fat burning metabolism and then you burn fat. It's pretty easy. And you need to eat enough, because if you're not eating enough, then you're actually going to suppress your metabolism. So we want to encourage your metabolism. You eat enough so your body says, hey, we're not in a famine. We don't need to keep hold of all this fat. We can actually use it. And you're getting the right things. And that's another thing that I've noticed in people trying to lose weight, is if they're nutritionally deficient, your body can't really ramp up your metabolism in the first place, because What's it going to ramp it up with? It needs all these vitamins, minerals, and proteins and fats to bring about the normal molecular processes of your cells. And so if you don't have enough of those, okay, well, you can dump more energy into the system, but it's still going to hit a bottleneck. If you have a car manufacturing plant, and you're saying, hey, look, we have all this steel and glass. We just want to use it all. We're going to get extra workers in here. We're just going to build up as many cars as we can. So we just get all this stuff out of there. We've got so much extra. But you're only getting in 200 tires a day. You're only going to make 50 cars a day. That's it. You're bottlenecked. Even though you have all the other things in surplus, you have a lot of fat in surplus. If you don't have enough magnesium and zinc and phosphorus and all these other, you're not going to be able to do the things that your body needs to do, and you're going to hit that bottleneck. That's a theory, but I see it more and more that people have very difficult times losing weight when they're malnourished, when they're sort of have lower levels of vitamins, minerals, and proteins and fats, and then they're not eating enough as well. That slows down their metabolism also.
Yet the pattern that you mentioned, the one that people lose weight and then they regain it even more, that I've gone through that cycle, I can say probably 10 times minimum for sure. And I just hated the fact that every year I gain weight, lose weight. I just want to be consistently lean, and I have a good amount of muscle mass. I've been training for 6 years almost, so I'm I got to get on this carnivore diet. And since then, for some reason, I've been eating more. I don't track calories. I sleep less. I just have energy throughout the day. My testosterone feels high. My libido feels high. And I'm like, this is great.
Yeah.
Is that normal?
It is. Yeah. So, I see a lot of people that improve their sleep. They get much better quality of sleep, so they don't need as much. And some people get weird disturbances with sleep. Sometimes you can have, different reasons for that. Easy fix for that. Most people, if you just eat a fatty meal before bed or eat, more fat right before bed, that seems to help. But most people just improve their sleep. I was always a terrible sleeper. I had horrible insomnia from when I was a kid. I remember in junior high, I could not sleep some nights. I would just be sitting there awake all night, couldn't get to sleep. And then I'd go to school and I'd just be exhausted all day. And it's just God, it was just so miserable. I sleep like a baby every single night now. It's amazing. And hormones massively improve. So, your weight starts getting better because you're in a fat burning metabolism. Your body knows what's going on. You're not disrupting your leptin or your insulin. And so your body can actually function as it was designed to do and regulate how much body fat that it wants. And especially if you're eating enough and you're exercising, this is all going to just go in the right direction. Hormones, massive difference. We're going back to insulin again. We keep going back to insulin because it is so important. It affects hundreds of different processes in your bodies, including your hormones. So when you have a little bit of a bump, like if you're on a carnivore diet, a ketogenic carnivore diet, we're not having these big massive swings of carbs, big massive swings of insulin. You are getting a bump in insulin when you have protein, but it's much smaller. And when is that much smaller sort of a bump, and you're insulin sensitive, you don't have insulin resistance, you can actually improve certain hormonal functions. Like it will sensitize your liver to growth hormone to make IGF-1, which helps your body grow, heal, and repair. It sensitizes your receptors on your Leydig cells in your testicles to LH, luteinizing hormone, which stimulates testosterone. So that little bit of a rise actually gives a bit of a boost. Problem is that when you eat carbs all the time, you're eating these 3 times a day, you're getting these big massive glucose spikes, you're getting these big massive insulin spikes, your insulin is always high. Then you start getting insulin resistance and things like that as well. When you're getting this overabundance of signal, it actually starts down regulating those receptors because saying, hey, we're getting too much noise here. And it's too much. It's like someone who does cocaine. The first time they do it, they get this big, massive response. They feel great, but every time they do it after that, they get less and less of a response. And so they take more and more to get the same high. It's the same thing with your testosterone and your growth hormone. The more you overexpose your body to insulin, the less sensitive it is to insulin. We call this insulin resistance. And so we know that men with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, or even having these big sugar spikes and insulin spikes, have lower levels of testosterone, far lower levels of testosterone. And so we're just getting away from that. You get rid of the carbs, you get rid of the insulin, and things sort of start normalizing, and then all of a sudden your LH receptors start going up, and you start making more testosterone for the same amount of LH, right? Because now your Leydig cells are more sensitive to that. You start making more growth hormone or some more IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, because now it's more sensitive to the growth hormone. Now, if you have a bit of protein, that is going to actually improve your testosterone. That is actually going to improve your IGF-1, right? Whereas if you overdo it, it will suppress it. In women, it sort of does it a bit differently. It still suppresses hormones, still disrupts hormones, but it does it in a sort of different way. It's still, and that's the other thing, insulin blocks the production of growth hormone as well. So your liver's less sensitive to growth hormone, and now you have less of it. You're massively reducing your IGF-1 and your growth hormone, both men and women. Women get it a bit different look, though. They make testosterone first, and that's converted into estrogen in the ovaries. Insulin blocks that conversion. And so what they do is they get too much testosterone and too little estrogen, and that's the leading cause of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the leading cause of infertility in the Western world. And also early menopause, women having their estrogen levels just go down, down, down until they stop having their periods, and we say, oh, well, that's just menopause. Well, I have women in their 30s and 40s sort of that were going through that, then we just switched their diet, all of a sudden their periods are perfect, their PCOS is gone, they're able to have babies. I have women in their 50s who have been able to come out of menopause. I have 6 women in their mid-50s, 55 to 57, who hadn't had a period in 5-6 years and now started having their periods again and started making normal amounts of estrogen. And obviously you have to check that because there can be other reasons why you can bleed after you haven't had a period for a while, but they were all fine. This was actually a return of their periods. So there's massive, massive, massive impact on your hormones from insulin, from just eating carbohydrates and raising insulin, and inappropriately, because you have different variations in insulin based on your protein. That's normal, and that's what your body's trying to respond to positively, and you're overwhelming that by having carbohydrates. And then the further compounding factor is that plants have hormones too. People don't realize that. All these hormones in cows, all this sort of, yeah. Cows are animals, and animals have hormones. Plants have them too, and they have them in much higher abundance than the meat that we eat. And whether they're for their own function and action, or they're just there as disruptive compounds to damage the physiology of animals trying to eat them, to screw up their hormones, to screw up their fertility, things like that, the effect is the same. Hormone-treated beef has 1.9 nanograms of estrogen. Non-hormone treated beef has 1.3 nanograms of estrogen per 3 ounces of lean beef. Okay, so the argument is, well, that hormone treated beef is 50% higher. My God, 50%, that's huge. Okay, that's a relative difference, right? Well, what's the absolute difference? Is 0.6 nanograms. Okay, so let's put that in context. 3 ounces of cabbage has over 2,000 nanograms of cabbage, right? A birth control pill has 35,000 nanograms of estrogen. 3 ounces of soy has 200,000 nanograms of estrogen. And a fertile woman would make about 500,000 nanograms of estrogen a day. So in that context, 0.6 nanograms, really not that impressive. Flaxseed, 3 ounces of flaxseed has 600,000 nanograms of estrogen, right? So, and cyanide, so that's great. And we give this stuff to kids, we put them in smoothies and go, here you go, it's healthy. Like, what the hell it is. So that's what we're doing to ourselves. We're destroying our hormones. We're destroying our health in a lot of ways, and that's a big one. And so, there was a study in the early 2000s. I remember seeing this in college, and it always stuck with me because it's just a funny title. It said, "You're not half the man your grandfather was." And it looked at men in their 20s in the early 2000s, which would have been my generation. And they looked at I don't think I was one of them because I was carnivore at the time, and definitely don't think I had low testosterone. But they found that men in their 20s on average in the early 2000s had half the testosterone of men in their 60s back in the 1970s, right? And so they say, well, your testosterone just goes down over time. Well, actually, it's not supposed to. And if you're not damaging it by the things you're eating or things you're exposing yourself, it's not like they were all carnivores in the 1970s. They just didn't have as much garbage. They had a much higher amount of saturated fat that they were eating, animal fats, and that sort of switch happened in the late 1970s, eating much more carbs and grains and cutting out the saturated fat and red meat. It had a big impact, had a negative impact, especially in hormonal health. And now testosterone levels are even lower, right? So it's it's pretty dramatic, and that's going all the way up because it's just getting worse as we age as well. And so you might be okay like in your 20s, but again, it's less than half of what 60-year-old men had in the 1970s, and then it just goes down from there. So just changing your diet to what we were designed to eat, just not eating carbs, not getting insulin spikes, and not eating all these phytoestrogens and estrogen mimics and endocrine disruptors that are in plants makes a huge difference. And I see my patients massively improve. Like I said, I have women coming out of menopause, reversing PCOS, being able to have kids again. I have men in their 70s tripling their testosterone levels back to optimal levels for a 25-year-old. Not what 25-year-olds are now, but actual what there should be, right? And I have 25-year-olds doing the same thing, where their levels are down there that below that my 70-year-old patients, and then they switch their diet and everything comes up to where it's supposed to be. So I see massive differences in people's hormonal health as well as their fertility. We have the lowest fertility rates in history, not just because of choice, because people say, well, I don't want to have kids, but people that are trying to have kids and can't have kids and have to go to fertility clinics. That's the highest ever. And so, this is a problem, and I think that's a major cause of it. There are other ones too. The different plastics that we use, BPAs, but not just that, BPA, BPC, BPD, they change the chemical slightly and is just as harmful to your endocrine system and your hormones, but it's not a BPA. So we can say, oh, BPA free. It's just as bad, if not worse, right? You just avoid plastics. Fragrances, perfumes, scented candles, Glade plugins, all these sorts of things, they trash your hormones. And they typically in one direction, they stuff up testosterone. And even some essential oils can potentially do that. Like, it's not robust data, but there are some studies suggesting that like tea tree oil and lavender aren't great for testosterone levels. So there's a ton of things. Not getting out in the sun. Our circadian rhythm is dictated by the sun, by the type of light that goes into your eyes. And so we have artificial lights. Our brain thinks it's a different time of day. Okay, so we're going to get a different hormonal response because our hormonal signaling is dictated by the sun, by our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm is dictated by the sun, by the light. And so if we're just indoors all the time with artificial light, we are disrupting our circadian rhythm, which means we are disrupting our hormonal patterns, and we will not have the same hormonal expression. I mean, there are studies showing that just 30 minutes, 3 days a week in the sun with your shirt off can actually boost testosterone and growth hormone levels. Just that, So there's a lot of things, but it comes down to just not exposing ourselves to the things that we need, not getting the proper nutrition from a species appropriate diet, and exposing ourselves to things that are harmful, and that could be anything from plant toxins to agrochemicals, glyphosate, to screens and artificial lights. So there's a lot there, but it all sort of comes down to that paradigm. You're exposing ourselves to things our bodies aren't supposed to deal with, and we're not giving ourselves the things that we need and require.
Yeah, absolutely true. I noticed, human body can like survive, and like if they have like anything, they have food, they can adapt to anything. If it's carbs, if it's meat, it has the ability to adapt. And I think a lot of people, just because they live and they survive, they think that's okay to eat. And I noticed that I've tried different diets. I've tried the vegan diet, I've tried all sorts of diets, and I noticed, as I said before, like I felt better and I looked better and I felt better, I've done better with lower carbs. So I was like, what's next after that? And the less carbs that I ate, it just seems that I perform better. And like it's good to know, like, a lot of people, I'm sure you noticed that too, like a lot of people are getting exposed to like, eating clean whole foods, which is nice. It's better than eating junk food and all that. But I'm really curious to see like how do they make that transition to the carnivore diet? What would you suggest them? Because I'm really passionate about this and I want to put more people on this. So how would you go about that?
Well, I think the main thing is education and just showing them the facts and all the things that we talked about here. Most people don't know that or don't understand that, or I think there's a reason why that there's some other information why that may be true, but this other thing means that we still need to eat plants or something like that. Well, you need
Yeah.
certain nutrients. You have to get these nutrients. That's where all the vitamins and minerals are. In fact, it's not. Meat is where you get all your vitamins and minerals, proteins and fats that you need. Look at the Inuit. They don't eat anything else. They don't need to. And neither do we. And when you're not eating plants with all these anti-nutrients such as phytic acid, oxalates, lectins, tannins, saponins, protease inhibitors, etc., that block, bind, and disrupt the normal metabolism and breakdown and digestion and absorption of these nutrients, then you simply don't need the same amount. And also they're more bioavailable because there are nutrients in plants, but they're not as bioavailable. You can't get them. Some of them you can't access at all. Corn has a lot of niacin, but you cannot access any of it. And so people were actually dying of niacin deficiency, which is called pellagra, by the thousands in the early 1900s, which is why we started fortifying niacin in bread, because people just weren't getting enough because they were predominantly eating corn and grains, and they did not have enough bioavailable niacin, even though there was a ton of niacin in corn. We just can't access it because we're not designed to eat it. I mean, that's proof positive. There's a lot of other proofs, but that's one of the proofs that we're not designed to eat these things because we don't have the enzymes to break down and extract those nutrients or get all the nutrients we need. So the thing is just it's education. That's what I try to do with my podcast, with my YouTube channel, with my Instagram, with my website. It's all about education. It's about, here are these studies, here's this information, here's this data. This is why I came to this conclusion. Take a look at it, see what you think. And so that, and a common one is, well, doesn't red meat cause cancer? Absolutely not. Over 800 studies show that, in a systematic review done by the University of Washington showed that no, there's no correlation, not even a correlation between, even junk food, or like not junk food, but processed meats and cancer, and certainly not unprocessed red meat and cancer or cardiovascular disease or any other disease. And so, that was published just a couple of years ago. And the WHO said that it was a risk factor for cancer, but they only looked at like 30 studies, and they cherry picked those 30 out of the 800, and they sort of ignored those because those didn't say what they wanted them to say. And even then, it showed a very, very weak correlation, only 18% increased risk association. And if you're looking at epidemiology, big population-wide studies, you really don't pay attention to it unless it's over a 200% increased risk association. It's just background noise. It's just confounding, And so, they took these poor, weak studies that showed a very weak correlation. But then, a lot of the reasons why they did is because they put junk food like Burger King or McDonald's and Pizza Hut. They called that meat because it has meat toppings, or it has a little meat patty, even though 90% of the calories from a Big Mac meal come from plants or thereabouts, maybe more, because you have this tiny little meat patty that's lean and doesn't have all that many calories in it. And it's got 3 bread buns with sugary sauces and seed oils, and you've got lettuce and tomatoes, and you've got potatoes deep fried in seed oils that turn into trans fats, and then you got a big sugary drink. Over 90% of those calories are coming from plants. That's nearly vegan. You take out that little beef patty, that's vegan, right? And yet we're calling that meat. And we're saying that people that eat more meat get more sick, but only 18% increased risk. So again, it's useless. So that University of Washington paper looked at those studies and said that, and I quote, they were junk studies and lazy science. And they were. And so, and then we think, okay, well, what about cholesterol and causes heart disease? And actually, no, it doesn't. And that's what the data shows. And that's what I found, doing that deep dive in the literature, like, wow, we were just completely misled in medical school. That's not what the best evidence shows. The randomized controlled trials in human data show the opposite, that as you lower LDL and total cholesterol, actually more people die of heart attacks and strokes as a result. And that's been shown in randomized controlled trials and replicated and reproduced. And so it's just completely backwards. And then a lot of the studies that suggested that cholesterol and saturated fat and meat caused heart disease were actually fraudulent and they were falsified. So, you have to throw that out. If something's based on you have a premise that is based on on a known fabrication, you have to throw that out. You have to start fresh and look at it again. So, you educate people, you show them all these things, then they go like, okay, well, that makes sense. Everything makes sense. And then the main thing is give it a try. So I'm saying this and vegans are saying another thing. Okay, try it. You tried it. You tried veganism. Didn't go so well, right?
Nope.
Maybe it was better than what you were doing before. If you were eating a whole bunch of junk food and garbage, clean things up a bit. But, it wasn't as good as this,
Yeah,
right?
my
And that's
sister was
fine. Yeah.
sorry to cut you off. My sister
No, you're
was
fine.
vegan for like a good couple of years, and then like I just randomly we were in a restaurant. I gave her a steak, and she just completely changed. And after that, like she's being way more fitter. She has way more energy. She was just very lethargic when she was on the vegan diet, and I completely agree.
Well, you're not going to get enough iron. You're not going to get enough B12. You're not going to get enough proteins and fats. And there's always lies that people put out there that, well, if you're matching the amount of protein that you're getting from meat-based versus plant-based, then you can get the same muscle hypertrophy. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that if you take mass quantities of plant protein isolate and you match that perfectly with this other thing, then you won't get protein. You can get protein. The problem is it's not as bioavailable. It's not in a usable form. It's not in the right proportions. And it comes with a whole bunch of anti-nutrients. And so if you're isolating that protein and you're giving it, protein isolate from plants and a protein isolate from animals, and you give the exact same to people, you're going to get similar results. Yeah, who cares? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people eating food, and are they getting enough nutrients out of that food? And the answer is no. And the nutrients that come from that are of lower quality. They're incomplete because they don't have all the essential nutrients that we need, and they come with a host of harmful toxins and compounds that cause damage to your body. So no, this is not equivalent. Has nothing to do with, can you put on muscle by taking vegan supplements? No one gives a shit. I'm sorry, it's just that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about feeding people and getting healthy. So you can take tons and tons and tons of supplements and sort of cover some of your bases. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, is this diet beneficial? Can you get what you need from it? Does it have harmful toxins in it that will cause harm? Those are the answers that you need. But at the end of the day, you just try it for yourself. I mean, who cares what I say? Who cares what the vegans say? Who cares what anybody says? The only thing that matters is what happens to you. What happens, when you try these things. So you can have all the studies in the world saying that if you do this, then you'll get that. And sometimes they're not even that. Well, we did 137 people and 115 had this outcome. So, so there's 15 or 20 of them that didn't have that outcome. Okay, so you might be in that group. There are very few studies that show, like 5,000 people that did this and 5,000 people got that result. Very, very rare that you get that. So the only thing that matters is what happens to you. So you have a doctor, you have a study, you have something that recommends behavior A, and you try that. And if you get great results, great. And if you want to try something else and see if you get better results, great. I mean, that's what we need to do as people and patients and doctors is try that, to try to find better and more optimal ways of living. And so if you can have any amount of studies saying any amount of things, and most of them are fraudulent anyway, because most of them are put out by the food and drug companies, paying billions of dollars to just push a product. They're really just marketing. And the heads of, the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, which is the top medical journal in the world, or one of them, Dr. Horton, he said that. He said that at least half of the medical literature and scientific literature is completely false, if not fraudulent. They said at least half, and you just can't trust it anymore. And that was echoed by a lady, Dr. Angles, who she was editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the top medical journal in the world, for something like 15, 20 years. She was editor-in-chief for a while as well. She said the same thing. She said it's simply not possible to trust the scientific literature anymore. It's just corrupt. And so, that's because, Coca-Cola alone spent $119 million on nutritional research in 2015 alone, right? I mean, just take a guess the type of studies they come out with, which are like, oh, you feed mice more Coca-Cola, they actually lose weight. Coca-Cola is full sugar. Coca-Cola is a weight loss drink. I bet it is. Yeah, I bet you didn't just make that up and just and screw with the numbers and screw with things, or just flat out lie. I mean, that was never, these things aren't replicated and independently verified by outside sources, so that you just can't trust them. So, all these sources, they might come from corrupt sources. They might come from flawed methodology. We were talking, I was talking to someone earlier today about, the lean mass hyper-responder study where they had all these people on ketogenic diets. Their cholesterol levels were elevated. So, ooh, that's a risk. But all their risk factors improved. Their homocysteine went down, their diabetes went away, their weight came down. All these things improved, but their LDL went up. So, why are we associating that with bad health when that's clearly associated with good health? Their health is improving and that's going up. So maybe that's a good thing. And actually, randomized controlled trials say that it is. But that's the idea, and is that that's harmful. So they said, okay, well, we've got all these people, 100 people, they've been on, that have high cholesterol, been on ketogenic diets for 4 or 5 years. And what's their cardiovascular health look like? And they do this study and they look at the pipes and say, yeah, they have almost no plaque. Some people have a little bit, but not much. And say, okay, well, what happens in a year? And they found that there was very little, if any, progression. And it was not associated whatsoever with LDL or ApoB. Right, and some of these people had no buildup, and they had no buildup at the end of the study. And then you find out that actually, while that was still, positive results, there was no connection between LDL and ApoB and plaque progression. The company that looked at using an AI model to look at these and try to get more exact sort of figures on this, it turns out that they'd fudged the data, either intentionally or just some sort of mix-up with their algorithm. But they had 100 patients that they actually said they had more plaque progression than they had. For 100 patients. So they have to have messed up 100 times, and only in one direction. That's unlikely. It's unlikely to be accidental at that point. It's statistically very, very remote. And when they reevaluated these, when some of these people actually submitted their own scans in just on their own with their own doctor, they actually showed they actually had reduction in their plaques, actually reversed their plaques, right? And so they tried to go back to this company and say, hey, can you redo this because we're seeing some weird things? They refused, which also makes me think that they sort of did this on purpose, because now they're refusing to sort of check and things like that. It's like, if you're just getting it wrong, either on purpose or on accident, you're still useless. Like, I mean, like that's it. Like, you're either no good at your job, and you should not be getting paid to do this, especially going into like a scientific study. I mean, it's cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to conduct these studies, and they're taking a large portion of that, and then they're giving you completely false and arbitrary data, because they went to another company and they said, hey, we need to keep this double blind, because the other company actually they unblinded it and actually started looking at the data. They were not supposed to. So again, that shows that there's something going on there. But they went to another company and said, we want to keep this completely blinded. And they're like, yeah, that's the only way we would do it anyway. And so they blinded it. So they gave them blinded data, so they couldn't unblind it if they wanted to. And the data that came back, they actually found that like 30% or more actually had reduction in their plaques, even though their LDL was, at 13, 14, and, European and other numbers. And in America, it'd be like 400 or something like that, 400, 500, something like that, and actually had reduction in their plaques, right? So it just flies fully in the face of this stuff. So even then, when you have honest actors trying to put out real information against the tide, self-funding, crowdfunding to try to get this study going, because there's no multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical product at the end of it. They're just trying to actually find out what's real. and and then they go, to an independent checker, and they falsify the data or just completely bung it up to such an extent that it's completely useless and shows the wrong results. Either way, it's wrong. It's fictitious. And so, I mean, even then, you're having difficulty trusting this stuff. So at the end of the day, you just look at the information that makes the most sense to you and you give it a try. You want to try a vegan diet? Go for it. Guarantee you're not going to feel as good, because I have 70% of my followers on social media, YouTube, etc., came from that. They came from whole food plant-based diets, and it was fine for a time. There's this honeymoon period, and then and supplementing and all that sort of stuff can extend that honeymoon period, but eventually they get very, very sick and they're not doing as well, and they just start having these problems, and they just go like, okay, I need to start eating meat. And then they go carnivore, and it completely changes their life. A lot of them have autoimmune conditions. A lot of them had diabetes. I had one gentleman who was in some of my groups. He had such severe nutritional deficiencies that his neurological system just shut down. He was bedridden. He couldn't get out of bed. And yet he was still on these vegan forums on his phone talking about how great the diet was and how his diet was going to pull him out. He went from vegan to raw fruitarian, just thinking this is going to get better and better and better because really we're chimpanzees and our hands work to grab melons, and that's what they argue. And this kid was dying. And eventually his neurological function got so bad that he couldn't even pick up his phone and use his phone. And he just realized that day that his diet was killing him. He started eating meat, started going carnivore right after that. A few months later, he's out of bed doing physical therapy and getting his life back, and it had already destroyed his kidneys. He was on dialysis in his 30s, but, the rest of his life was improving. But these people destroy their health with these plant-based diets. The Western diet already is a plant-based diet. 70-80% of the calories we consume are from plants. They're hyper-vegetarian. So we're saying, no, we need to go vegetarian. You're already vegetarian. That's the problem. People in India consume only 3 kg of meat per person per year. I could eat that in a couple days, right? And I routinely do. And that's the maximum that they eat for the year on average, right? And that means that half the population eats less than that, right? And so, they have some of the highest rates of chronic disease in the world. They have some of the shortest stature. I mean, some of that's going to be genetic, but they are shorter as a population. They don't have all the obesity, but they have all the chronic disease. They have very serious levels of heart disease. They have some of the highest rates of diabetes on Earth. And yet they're all plant-based. So, what's going on? So, then you look at Hong Kong, that eats more meat per capita per year, per person per year. They eat like 1.5 pounds of meat or seafood per day on average. And that's including children, women and children. And they have the highest life expectancy on Earth, highest IQ on Earth. Singapore, very similar. They've massively improved their life expectancy. At the same time, they were increasing their meat consumption over the last 20 years. And there's another study out of University of Adelaide in Australia. We looked at 175 different countries and found that in all 175 countries, they had, as you correcting for all sorts of different things, they found that increased meat consumption correlated directly with longevity and better health, longer life and better health. So, long-winded way of answering that, so I apologize. But, just try to educate people, and then you just try it for yourself, and you'll see the evidence is there. But you could hear some vegan guy present things in a different way and could be very convincing that way too. Fine, try both. Do 30 days vegan, do 30 days carnivore, and decide for yourself. I mean, I know what I would do. I know what I did, and so do you. So there you go.
Yeah, it's a completely different paradigm when you start trying it out. For me, the principle that I follow, I wanna thrive. I don't care about surviving, or I can operate normally. I don't care about that. I want to feel the best, look the best, do the best. And I'm curious to see, how does it actually affect your performance at the gym from your experience? when you turned to carnivore diet?
Oh, night and day. I mean, I played professional rugby for 10 years, and 5 of those were on zero carb carnivore. I have never in my life been more athletic, had more exercise and athletic endurance and tolerance. I've never been able to work harder. There are studies showing that when you're in a ketogenic state, you can just withstand more lactic acid, so you can push your body harder. And and some people go, they get that burn, they're like, oh, I just can't do anymore. In ketosis, you can deal with a lot more than that. And so you can just push yourself harder, longer, and further, and you recover better. And then I don't even get sore when I work out. That's of all the things that I say, I guarantee you that's the one that's going to piss off the most people, is that I do not get sore after I work out. I did 45 sets of heavy legs the other day. No soreness in the days following that. People get incensed when I say that, but it's true, because the inflammatory factors that come from plants cause pain, stiffness, swelling, and pain, or pain, stiffness, swelling, and so on. So when you don't eat that stuff, it just goes away. And people say, oh, well, I still have some soreness, whatever, and you find out they're drinking coffee or something like that. I drink 1 cup of coffee, I'm sore for 2 days, so I don't have any of that stuff. I don't get sore, right? And so, so people can try it. Again, try it yourself. 2 weeks, get all the stuff out of your system. You won't get sore. I tried it. I kept doing sets of squats and sets of squats to failure, and I just could keep going. And then the next day I wasn't sore. And so I'm like, this is crazy. And a lot of other people have experienced that as well. So I've never found it easier to put on muscle than when I'm eating carnivore. I mean, you're trying to put on muscle, try eating muscle. That's what you need, And so you think, oh, you need this ratio and this. No, you need muscle. You're trying to put on muscle, eat muscle. That's what meat is. And so, that's exactly what you need to put on muscle. And I would get to the point where my endurance was so good, I couldn't run out of energy. I couldn't run out of energy during rugby games. Making tons and tons of tackles, running the ball, smashing into rucks, very physical. I played a very physical game. I lived for the contact. If I had a break and there was like one guy tracking me down, I could beat him around the outside. I would turn in and just smash him, just because I liked it. I liked that physicality. I liked hitting people. I liked being violent on the rugby field. That was a good medium and outlet for me to get out, certain frustrations that I had growing up. But it was, I was getting to the point where I wouldn't get tired. I wouldn't run out of energy. I just felt amazing all the time. I was sprinting miles at a time. I would just run hard, and I'd be like, okay, well, I'm just going to sprint a quarter mile, or sprint a half mile, or sprint a mile. I'm like, I could just do it. And I just did more, and I did more, and I did more. And it was just crazy. I got to a point that I just couldn't run out of energy. I did a whole talk called Ketogenic Carnivore Athletes, and I go through all the science and the studies that go behind it and the physiology. And people can go watch that for a deep dive. And there's also a bunch of professional athletes that do this and have done this historically and had some of the most amazing results. Michael Jordan's pregame meal was a steak 5 hours before the game. That's the only thing he'd eat all day, right? And that's what they found gave him the best blood work and outcome and performance at game days, for all his, different trainers and physical therapists and nutritionists, all that sort of stuff, checking his blood work, checking his performance, and all that sort of stuff. That's what they found: a steak 5 hours before the game day. That's it. Before the game time. That's it. So, he's not full carnivore, but it just goes to show that this is not a bad idea on its face. You get more energy. You tapped into your fat stores. So again, it's a fat burning metabolism, which means that you're tapped into your fat stores. 150 pound individuals for about 65 kilos with only 6% body fat. So, a lean person, small lean person, maximum that glycogen stores they can get in their muscles and their liver, if they just eating pasta and rice for the last week, maximum they can store in glycogen is about 2,400 kilocalories, right? And but that 6% body fat on that 150 pound individual, that's over 35,000 kilocalories of energy. So I weigh 240 pounds and I'm like 10% body fat. So I've got like 150,000 calories. It's like, I'm not going to run out, so if I'm eating carbs, all I can access are the carbs. I've got those glycogen in my muscle, my liver, and once that's out, I'm done. But if I'm tapped into my fat, I just keep going forever. And we have studies showing that in a carbohydrate athlete or ketogenic athlete, as long as you've given yourself, a few weeks, couple months to get adapted, you have as good or better performance than the carbohydrate athletes who are having to refeed and refuel the whole time, and you're just running off your own fuel. You have the same level of glycogen. The Volek faster trial in 2016 just took muscle biopsies off elite athletes before a 3-hour run, directly after, and then 3 hours after recovery. They found that the ketogenic group and the carb group had the exact same muscle glycogen at all 3 points, right? Whereas the ketogenic group, they're just replenishing it off their body stores, off their fat stores, and the carb group were sucking down gels and carbs and sugar. More carbs means more glycation, which is like the damage from sugar. We know that causes damage directly to our joints and to our arteries, which is why diabetes is the leading cause of heart disease and kidney failure and blindness and getting your legs amputated, because it damages the blood vessels. But it also damages your cartilage. And your cartilage in your joints. Your joints are your life as an athlete at any stage. If you have just trash knees, you're not doing much. You're certainly not playing sports at any sort of competitive level, and let alone professionally. So once your knees start giving out, once your joints start giving out, you got to start thinking of retirement. You may be forced into retirement. It may not be a choice. So if you're not eating carbohydrates, you're protecting your joints. You're not going to get arthritis as well. I mean, you could still get damage. I mean, I did kickboxing since I was a kid. There's a lot of knee strikes, and that damages the cartilage. That's the only piece of cartilage damage I have in my entire body. I would still be playing rugby today at 46 if it wasn't for that, and those bits of cartilage flake off and it just causes irritation and your knee swells up. No one told me that at 14 when I was doing kickboxing. That would have been nice to know, but probably still would have done it. But that's the only cartilage damage I have in my entire body, and that's from those direct strikes. And that's a very common thing in kickboxers and things like that. So for an athlete, there's so many. I mean, they're just from energy generation. You have like NAD plus. People take NMN and all these sorts of things to give them energy and all these sorts of things because they don't have enough NAD plus in their body and in their cells. And you need NAD plus to make ATP, which is your cellular energy. Okay, so when you're burning carbohydrates to make ATP, you need 4 NAD plus molecules. To burn ketones to make the exact same amount of ATP, you need 1. So you conserve 4 times as much NAD plus, which means you're not going to run into a bottleneck, and you're just going to keep being able to pump out energy. So you can take NMN, you can take all these things, you can do NAD infusions and boost your levels up so that you go through that bottleneck. But if you're just running on fat, then you don't need as much. So you're not going to run into that bottleneck. That's not going to be your bottleneck. So there's all sorts of different benefits that we can look at on paper. But again, just try it out yourself. There is an adaptation period where you're going to get more keto adapt. You're going to be able to use those ketones, fat oxidation, better. Usually a few weeks. Then you start seeing improvements. You might have a bit of a dip and then go up. Some people don't get a dip. I didn't get a dip. I just sort of was feeling good, and then after 2 weeks, it really just started taking off. But then it gets better and better and better. It improves your mitochondrial health. Insulin blocks autophagy. Autophagy breaks down your old precancerous cells and breaks down your mitochondria, so you have new, better mitochondria. And so when you have your insulin low, when you're in a ketogenic state, you're able to break down the old damaged cells, old damaged mitochondria, and make more of them. It's called mitogenesis. So studies have shown that after 3 months on a ketogenic diet, like a carnivore diet, you have 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective because they're all new and shiny. So that's going to help your energy production. So when you get out to that 3-month mark, we see studies from like McSweeney, where in 2018 they showed in elite athletes that self-selected into keto and carb groups and gave them 3 months to get adapted, fat adapted, that the ketogenic group actually outperformed the carb group in a 100-mile run, a 6-second sprint, and a powerlifting test. So all the different ways that you can move your body athletically, anaerobically, aerobically, and explosively, the ketogenic group won on all of them, right? And the sprints and the powerlifting test, the critical power test, came to statistical significance. The 100-mile run didn't come, but they did still win. And so anytime you talk to an athlete, whatever whatever sport they do, keto helps the other type. If it's like an endurance sport or something like that that they do, if they're doing, oh, this doesn't work in cycling, even though, four-time Tour de France winner Chris Froome was ketogenic, but whatever. And that ultra marathon runners and Ironman competitors are often ketogenic or even full carnivore, and speak publicly about it. And but they'll say, oh, well, that works in explosive sports and sprinting. Yeah, that's fine in rugby, but it doesn't work for the endurance. You need those carbs. And then you talk to, I was talking to a guy, very nice guy, but he was very wary of that whole idea that you can drop carbs as a professional athlete. And say, oh, well, that can work in, cycling or endurance running, but for explosive sports, you have to have that glycogen. Well, first of all, you have exactly the same amount of glycogen in keto and carb. That's been shown on muscle biopsy tests. And two, no, you don't, because you oxidize fat at up to 90% VO2 max when you're in a ketogenic state. It's only when you're in a carb state that you actually can only burn fat up to about 55% VO2 max. So if you're in a ketogenic state, you're just running on fat, and you don't need the carbs. You make some carbs, and you make the carbs that you need, but you don't need all that much. So you have better energy production. You have less bottlenecks with like the NAD+, and you have access to basically a bottomless reservoir of energy, which is your fat stores. Unless you're like extremely emaciated, you're going to be fine. Even that 150-pound guy with 6% body fat, 35,000 kilocalories of energy. I mean, that guy has a couple weeks before he even starts cutting into his muscles. I mean, he doesn't even need to eat for a couple weeks at all, right? And so we have a much better energy supply. And there's a guy I know, Alex McDonald. I had him on my podcast. He ran 5 marathons in 5 days without eating the entire week. Didn't eat at all. Just drank water. And his last day was actually better than his middle 3 days. So his first day was his best time, and his last day was his second best time. So it's not like he's just like going downhill that whole time. His legs were getting swollen, his ankles were getting hurt. He's wearing himself out by running that because he's not a runner. His first marathon was followed by 4 other marathons. He'd never run a marathon before, and then he ran 5 in a row. So it is a massive advantage. I have a lot of people that I work with are professional athletes, professional soccer players, professional rugby players, professional cyclists, professional runners. They're all excelling on ketogenic carnivore diets. So, and there's actual controlled studies showing that too.
Yeah, like it's interesting how like a lot of this information gets suppressed, in the mainstream media, or it gets demonized, and like when you actually start apply, as you said, apply instead of just watch content about it. When you apply, you see the difference. Then you can see, okay, wow, like there's another side of the coin that you've never experienced. And like I'm curious to like bring this side to my community, to especially Middle Eastern Armenians. So I feel like we eat a lot of carbs, a lot of vegetables. I'm trying to make people healthier. And how do you think, from your experience and your perspective, how does actually it help like the male body in general? From a hormonal perspective to the physical, muscular growth and all that.
Well, it's the same as with the female body, it just optimizes it. So it optimizes your hormones, it optimizes your body composition. And so it puts you in a position that you can get the most favorable body composition, helps you put on muscle, helps you lose fat. It helps optimize your hormones, it helps increase your testosterone and your growth hormone, just normalize them, get them into normal, healthy, optimal ranges. It does that for women as well. And so, doing this diet's not going to turn women into men. It's not going to just raise everybody's testosterone. In fact, in women, it tends to lower their testosterone if it's too high and raise their estrogen. So it just optimizes it. So if you're too skinny, it's going to put on lean body mass. If you have too much excess body fat, you're going to lose that. So it just optimizes your body composition, optimizes your hormones, and optimizes your health for both men and women. And I see that every day. I mean, I've thousands of patients that I've sat across a desk from, not just worked with online, that I've put on, that I've done these interventions with, and they've improved in exactly that way, and reversed disease and come off medications that people thought would never be able to come off of. And the drug companies don't want you to come off of it because you use like $4,000 or $5,000 a month in some of these medications, like for the autoimmune issues and things like that. So I know that it works. I see it work all the time, and it's just optimal. It's optimal nutrition, and you're going to get optimal health as a result, both hormonal and body composition.
How would you recommend to introduce this diet and way of living to people? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's not balanced, or it's not extreme, or I can't, be disciplined, all of that. I'm sure you've, met a lot of people who said that. Like, how did you deal with that?
Well, the thing is, I mean, again, you educate them, you show that actually you get everything you need. Just point out the native populations that don't eat anything else, like the Inuit. When in doubt, go to the Inuit, because you say the Native American, well, but they may have had maize or this and this in these areas and that. You know what? Who didn't is the Inuit, because they live on ice floes in the North Pole. So there's no plants there to eat, even if they wanted to, which they actually largely didn't, because in areas that were more southern, the historical record actually shows that no, they didn't actually eat fruits and berries and things like that during the summer. They just ate meat in the summer or winter. And so, but either way, when you go north enough, especially during the ice ages, there's nothing to eat except meat anyway. They're on ice floes, so there's nothing growing up there besides animals, right? Because they got fish in the sea and things that eat those fish, right? And then the Inuit eat everything in between. So you can point that out. Like, clearly it's a balanced diet, and you can explain that too, that when you're not eating plants with anti-nutrients, you actually get a lot more out of the meat that you're eating. You're not blocking it out. And they're not sustainable. I mean, everyone has their own reason. If they don't want to do it in the first place, then fine. But if they have a good reason, and that's why I think watching these videos on why it's a good idea, why we are carnivores, plants having toxins and all these other sorts of things. Understanding why, like, wow, that is a good idea. If they have a good reason why, like they have Crohn's disease and they want to put that in remission, they've seen thousands of other people put that in remission, and they want a piece of that. That's a good reason why. Then the motivation comes on its own. You have a good reason why, the how becomes a lot easier. And for the people that say, well, it takes a lot of discipline and self-control, a bit at first, but after that, not really. Once you see how amazing this is for you, it doesn't really take much at all. If you feel 1,000 times better than you ever have before, right, you're going to have no interest in going back. And so what I tell people is that I have no self-control. It takes zero self-control and discipline to do exactly what you want to do. I don't want to eat any of that stuff. I would fight my way out of a room to not eat broccoli. Like, I would do it, and I'd win, So, I'm just not going to eat that stuff, unless it's like a survival issue. Like, if I'm dying and I need to survive, then I'll eat it, but I'll ferment it and I'll cook it and I'll do these other sorts of things to lower the toxic load and bring out the bioavailability, and, but otherwise, no, there's not a chance in hell. So it doesn't take all that much. And when you have someone with Crohn's disease, and every time they have some Brussels sprouts or some pasta, they have bloody diarrhea for the next 3 days and they're in crippling pain, they're not going to want to do it either. And so once they see that contrast, they can see, hey, I can come off my medication and I can be a lot better, and I can lose weight, and I can put on muscle, and I can improve my hormones, and I can get off these meds, and I can reverse these diseases. Why the hell would I eat any other way? And that's what a lot of people have come to. And some people sort of dabble back and forth, but then they go like, oh my God, that was a mistake. I really felt horrible when I ate that stuff, so now I'm back on track. And at the end of the day, I mean, people are adults. They get to do what they want. And I don't care if people choose to eat pasta. I just don't want them eating pasta and vegetables because they think they need to, because that's what's healthy. I don't like doctors and nutritionists and professionals saying that you have to eat things that are bad for you, because they are bad for you. And that bothers me. If you want to smoke, if you want to drink, if you want to do heroin, I don't agree with it, but that's your choice. I don't care. If you understand the consequences, then every adult gets to make an adult decision, whether or not I would agree with it, whether or not I think it's a good idea or I think it's a really bad idea. So I don't care if people eat salad, if they enjoy salad. I just want them to have the full facts and the data that it's not actually adding to their health to add a salad to their steak. And it's not. And so, if they understand that and they go like, yeah, well, I just enjoy it. So fine, do what the hell you want, but most people will find that they feel much better without it. And if you're interested in optimizing your health, or at least improving your health and coming off medications, especially if you have some illnesses, then that's something that's quite appealing to people. I don't have any of these illnesses. I wasn't on any medication, but I still felt 1,000 times better. I don't get sore when I work out. I've been sore my whole life as an athlete. And now I'm not. You think I'm going to go back to that, having back pain and barely being able to get out of my car every day? No, thank you. Not going back to that nonsense. Having brain fog, not sleeping well, all these different sorts of things. I mean, I have any amount of carbs or beans, my back kills for like 4 days. No, there's no chance. I have no interest in doing that sort of thing. And so when you see that contrast and you understand that, then it becomes a lot easier.
Okay, so Dr. Chaffee, what would you say someone wants to get on the carnivore diet? What would you recommend them to eat? Is it just meat? Is it just meat and eggs? Or you would recommend them to have a little bit of dairy if it's possible?
Well, it depends on what you're going for. Dairy can cause you to overeat and cause you to store fat. So if you're trying to lose fat, probably good to avoid dairy. It can also have enough carbs. It kicks you out of ketosis. I think being ketogenic is really important, so you're not fat burning metabolism. So keeping your carbs below 20 grams a day, even from dairy, I think is important. Dairy is a gray area. It has a lot of good nutrients, but it has other things that will slow you down, cause inflammation, can potentially kick off autoimmunity, can make it not lose weight as fast as you'd want to, things like that. But otherwise, it's just eat the meat or eggs that you enjoy, that makes you feel the best, and that you can afford and have access to. If you have autoimmune issues, usually have to be a little more tight than that. Eggs, dairy can certainly trigger autoimmunity, but sometimes even pork and chicken, depending on what they're fed, can trigger autoimmunity as well. So sticking with just the beef and lamb, the ruminant animals, is always going to be your safe zone. And so if you're having reactions or something like that, that's always where you go, especially for autoimmunity. But if you tolerate those other meats, then go for them. Just make sure you're getting enough fat. It's a high fat diet, so 1 to 2 grams of fat for every 1 gram of protein. And you eat intuitively. So you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. You do that as many times of the day that your body tells you to, and that's it. And the main thing is not eating all the other stuff, because that just gives you the nutrients you need. But those other things cause harm and actually block out those nutrients. So my hard rule for myself, and what I suggest to people if they want to do this optimally, is no plants or mushrooms, no sugar or any sweeteners, and nothing artificial. And that goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. So you can put it up to a litmus test where it's like, okay, coffee, well, it's a plant. Okay, so that's out. What about honey? That's not from a plant. Well, it technically is. It's just concentrated nectar that a bee vomited out, but it's also sugar, right? And so, things like that, or stevia, well, that's natural. Yeah, it's a natural plant and it's a sweetener. So no, and it also is an endocrine disruptor and can screw up your hormones. And the stevia plant has been used in Paraguay for over 1,000 years as birth control. So, not a great idea to put this stuff in the drinking water, right? Which, may be something to do with why we have such low fertility rates. Who knows? But things like that. So you just avoid all these things that cause harm. Just eat a whole bunch of fatty meat and eggs if you tolerate them, and just live your life. And then you can just sort of, then food becomes food. You put it in as fuel, and then you just get to do things during the day that you enjoy. And that's sort of the whole point of life, is not going from meal to meal to meal and surrounding yourself with meal times and social activities that all surround around meals, because we're just constantly eating. You just eat and you go about and you do things. You do things with people, and that's much more enjoyable.
Living life, basically.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Beautiful. Thanks for coming on, Dr. Chaffee. I learned a lot. I'm sure the viewers learned a lot too. A lot of great information. Yeah. Any closing words? Anything you're working on right now? People can be excited for.
No, yeah. I'm working on a book. We're just sort of arguing that humans are carnivores, and we a lot of the chronic diseases that we're getting are from toxic exposures and malnutrition. And so I'm trying to make a definitive argument for that. use it with all the best available evidence that we have now. No evidence is ever going to be complete, but I think there's quite a lot of evidence there to show that that this fits. And when again, if you just try it yourself and you see that your diseases go away, that's the only thing that really matters.
Great, and thank you so much. I
No
appreciate you
problem.
for coming
Thanks,
on.
man. No
Of course.
worries.